Hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Whistleblowers After Disclosure, Financial Impacts, Career Paths and Survival Strategies. I'm Kate Kenny, Professor of Business and Society here at NUI Galway's J. Cairns School of Business and Economics, and I'm a member of the Whitaker Institute. I'll be hosting today's webinar along with my colleague Mariana Fataki, Professor of Business Ethics at the University of Warwick Business School. The purpose of today's event is to share the results of our research project on the costs, impacts and survival strategies post-disclosure of whistleblowers who leave their role because they've spoken out. So just to be clear, most people who raise issues in their workplace do not experience reprisal. We know this from research, but about 1 in every 5 workers does encounter some kind of detriment from speaking out. And this comes from research in the UK, in Ireland, in Australia, US. This is a lot. There's a lot of people experiencing detriment. Now, on the one hand, there are moves to address this today. We're seeing much greater focus on enabling speak-up systems and processes in organizations across the world. Managers, owners, realizing the importance and even the benefits of listening to whistleblowers because they provide this early warning system about potential disasters. We're also seeing new laws enacted in many countries across the world aimed at countering retaliation. And both myself and Professor Fataki have worked on these critical areas, as have many of our panelists today. But there is a problem that remains that is not being addressed. Sometimes the system does not work for the whistleblower. Sometimes the law fails the individual. And when this happens, people and their families suffer for disclosing wrongdoing. Others see this, of course, and may decide not to come forward at all as a result. But without these people who are willing to let the public know about wrongdoing, financial fraud, abuse in institutions, potential environmental disasters, we remain in the dark and we cannot act on those things. We've seen this very clearly in the last year with the workers trying to come forward about health and safety and many other dangerous breaches of policy and law and not being listened to in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we're focusing today is what is the cost of speaking out and what helps people who find themselves in this situation. We're very fortunate we've brought together professionals with experience of whistleblowing themselves to discuss this alongside a panel of experts working in the area for many years. Okay, so before we go on, just some housekeeping. For today's webinar, we have a range of people joining as attendees from here in Ireland, the US, Canada, Germany, Slovakia, and even Australia. We'll be here for about 1.5 to 2 hours. If you have to leave, don't worry, a recording is going to be made and sent to those who signed up. So what I'm going to do is start by introducing the research, and then our first panel will focus on post-disclosure survival strategies with people who have spoken out, whistleblowers, chaired by Professor Mariana Fataki. Our second panel then features discussion by experienced advocates, lawyers and journalists who've worked in the whistleblowing sphere for many years. Each panel will be approximately half hour. And we would like to hear from you during the webinar. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, please send it through the Q&A. We're going to answer as many questions as we can towards the end of each panel, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. So just to introduce the project itself, the idea came from conversations that Mariana and myself had when we were researching this area for a number of years. We'd be interviewing whistleblowers for different projects, maybe to do with law or to do with speak-up system or impact of whistleblowing. And when the tape recorder would be switched off, a number of people would ask us, you know, okay, informally, can you tell me if you've encountered others who've been in this situation? You know, what are the very practical things they encounter and what do they do? Do you know what job opportunities they availed of? Do you know how they secured a career path in a different direction? And they would say, I struggle to pay my mortgage, my bills. Can academic research help me there? And we felt really frustrated because there was very little available to recommend in response. So this is why we set out in this project to examine these very practical, very tangible aspects of the whistleblowing experience that had been overlooked. In this project, we interviewed 58 whistleblowers and 17 experts and surveyed 92 whistleblowers. And we thank many people who've worked on this project with us who are named in the report, we'll mention later. And we also throughout the project wanted to get input from, we had a international advisory team, many of whom are here with us today, and we're going to put on the findings and the questions from them. And we held 4 workshops along the course of the project, some of whom we invited whistleblowers in to comment and give feedback on the emerging findings. And we'd invite you to read the report. There is a link provided in the information email for this event, and I'll send it through the chat. So our sample, just to be very clear, was restricted to people who'd spoken out in their organizations and were no longer in their current role as a result of the disclosure, either because, as often happens, they resigned because the current role was no longer feasible due to informal forms of reprisal and retaliation, or perhaps were moved internally or had been dismissed, those reasons for leaving their current role. Now, most of the survey participants were in the US and the UK, and other countries were represented as well. There was a range of sectors: government, employees, health, education, along with others. And people had spoken out about a range of wrongdoing, from fraud, financial misconduct, abuse. We drew on previous research that has provided research categories for use in these kind of surveys. I can talk more about the data sampling, but there's information in the report. So I'm just going to summarize, show you a quick video with the results of what we found. We won't focus on a lot of our findings tied in with and confirmed a lot of existing research on informal impacts of whistleblowing, so we won't focus on that, only on the new information that we found hadn't been focused on before. So for example, for those who left their role and spent time out of work, the average duration of unemployment was 3.5 years. We also found evidence of blacklisting. This has been researched before, but found some interesting figures on 64% of our whistleblowers reported formal blacklisting, written blacklisting, with 21% informally blacklisted and 30% not blacklisted. But I'll just show you now this video, and what I want you to understand and focus on is we looked at earnings differentials. So what we were particularly interested in this project was putting some tangible material numerical figures on the financial detriment that people experienced, both from the fact that they had to pay new expenses they never encountered before, whether these were to do with legal costs or health costs for problems that were related to the disclosure, but also the earnings differential, the difference between salary post-disclosure and salary pre-disclosure, given the impact on one's role in these cases and career. So what we found was that by giving each, calculating each individual as a percentage pre and post disclosure, this enabled us to compare across different employments, different kinds of sectors. But as a headline, I mean, of the 92 people we surveyed, 60 provided information, and for about 7 out of 10 people that did provide this data, speaking out resulted in a loss of income. And how much? Well, on average, we were looking at respondents talking about 67% of their pre-disclosure earnings. So this was quite substantial, particularly for the fact that many people were senior and established in their role prior to encountering this situation. I'm just going to show now the quick summary video. So bear with me as I share my screen.
Whistleblowing allows us to address dangerous wrongdoing, corruption, and dysfunctional behaviour in today's organisations. However, our research, funded by ESRC, British Academy, and the Leverhulme Trust, discovered significant costs for whistleblowers whose employment status has changed as a result of speaking out. It also showed that we, as a society, do very little to support them. A significant amount of whistleblowers experience a reduction in income from employment, either as a result of being demoted, experiencing job stagnation, or from being dismissed and even blacklisted. Some never work again in the industry in which they've trained. And many are forced to cover their own legal fees, pay for travelling to support groups, and they often face costs associated with deterioration in physical or mental health as a direct result of their disclosures. Our research found that the average overall losses reported by whistleblowers amount to a staggering £217,000. For those who specifically reported a reduction in income, the average cost was £480,000. And this number can sometimes be much, much higher. 40% of our respondents also spent well over 1,000 hours on their case, hours that could be spent working, with many whistleblower struggles dragging on for months, even years. There are also massive impacts on their family and personal life. A child may lose time with their parent, stress and anxiety in the home can be high, and spouses can experience a breakdown in their marriage. The associated costs for whistleblowers can be immense, despite the value they have to society. This is unjust, and it deters people from speaking out in the first place. We need to drive social and attitudinal change around whistleblowing and ensure that people are protected from retaliation or reprisal. We need to help people get back into meaningful work to reduce the impact on their self-esteem and mental health. And by providing assistance with financial costs, as well as the right level of support and training, we can create a society that is fairer for those who sacrifice much for the protection of all of us. So, let's change the public debate on whistleblowing. To find out more about our research and to see what steps need to be taken to ensure a fairer future, please visit www.whistleblowingimpact.org.
So the project is summarised in the report. I'll send it again through the chat and there's links. I mean, one of the things that stood out for me is the time cost is something that was unusual. People haven't typically studied that before, but we found almost 1 in 3 people spending close to 1,500 hours on their job. That is what the average person spends on their, 1,500 on their whistleblowing disclosure. That's to do with obviously the wrongdoing itself, but also researching organizational policies they need to know about, in some cases researching the laws that apply to them. And given that the average person spends 1,700 hours on their full-time job, we want to reframe this as a job. This is something that a lot of people don't realize is the sheer labor involved in speaking out on behalf of the rest of us. So before I pass over to the panel, just to let you, our expert group, when we were planning the survey, had urged us to also include information about personal and social benefits that people found. I mean, obviously, in many cases, the experience is a negative one, and the focus of a lot of research is on the negative. But when we asked people what benefits may have they experienced, the overwhelming majority, 71%, said they experienced peace of mind as a result, with 62% saying they felt satisfaction, they'd raised awareness of the wrongdoing, and there was some social benefits. And we also did find, and this leads us into our first panel, you'll see more detail in the report, a small proportion described their mental well-being as having improved post-disclosure for 24%. Okay, small said that they felt that had been an improvement. And so we correlated that with the different benefits. And we found that people who reported a positive career change after disclosing were over 5 times more likely to also report improved mental health. So a small finding, but one that seems to suggest to us that we need to look closer at this issue of further career development and what happens to one in terms of ability and capacity to find meaningful work after this experience of disclosure. So our take home, if you like, is we do need to reframe whistleblowing. There's a heavy price tag to pay if you leave your role for whatever reason after disclosing. It can be a full-time job while you're in the experience, and there's very little support available. And finding meaningful work seems to be vital for people's well-being after the fact. So this work question leads us into our first panel, and I'm going to hand over to Mariana for this.